Well, hello there. My name is Reverend Steve Toyoshima. You may have seen me from one of the pre-recorded messages that I send over here once in a while. I grew up at the temple, well, not really, from about 2005. That's the problem with ad-libbing, is sometimes your mind goes on a weird track. But actually started out at this temple as a member, starting to come to services and listening to Rinban Ito's messages in English from about 2005. And so one of the things that I wanted to talk about this week is the theme of loneliness. Look, Steve said that I would brighten everybody with some smiles, and but I think that we have to talk about serious things as well as more fun things too. So recently in Hawaii, I talked about the epidemic, not one of physical sickness, but one of spiritual, emotional, kind of a sickness of loneliness, an epidemic of loneliness that we have been experiencing, especially in this country. Now, part of that is the shifting times that we live in. As we learn in Buddhism, things are always changing. The society, language, all these things are constantly shifting and moving. And we get caught up in these movements. And so one of the things that's happened, I believe, in the last few decades is that America has become a lonelier and lonelier place. It may not seem that lonely. We have people that we know at work. We have our families at home. What could be wrong with that? But it was such a serious issue growing in America that the Surgeon General a few years back came out with a study that said, yes, Americans, people who live in America are feeling lonelier and lonelier. Why are we feeling so disconnected from one another, And the answer is that part of this shift in economics and demographics, things like people having to move to the city for work, people moving from their hometowns, we're a more mobile workplace than ever. I think any of the millennials in the audience definitely know that we're not working at the same company for 20, 30, 40 years like people of our parents and our parents' generation used to. We have to take work where we can. Many people are having to take work like a Uber or DoorDash, something like that, where you don't even have coworkers. You're just kind of by contract. And so there are these places that are very important to our socialization as human beings. It's first, second, and third spaces. So your first place is your home. It's a place that, it's your home base. It's a place where you can feel safe. You can decorate it the way you want. You can live the way you want in your home. And this includes your immediate family. And you have your second spaces. These are the places where we spend a lot of time too. That's where we work. That's places where we make friends at work. We socialize, very important to our development as human beings. But there are these places called third spaces. Maybe my parents' generation knew them better. Places like bowling alleys or elk lodges and clubs and things like that. For my grandparents, it would have been the Gardeners Association here in Los Angeles. And there were places where, anybody is really able to enter. They're welcoming spaces. They're places where everybody is treated equally, and that people, even if you're new to the place, you're welcomed in, and there's a space for you to learn, to be valued. And, well, it's like the most famous sitcom of the 1980s, Cheers. It's a place where literally everyone knows your name. And so these are places that are essential for our development. It's a place where we come in contact with people from different backgrounds as us, people with different beliefs, different, all kinds of things have a melting pot within these third spaces. But these are disappearing. Of course, churches, synagogues, mosques, Buddhist temples, these are part of these third spaces. And as everybody knows, the average American is probably less interested in religion than 10, 20, 30 years ago. And maybe a lot of young people, they have bad experiences with maybe kind of a fire and brimstone, or they didn't find a teaching that really resonated with them, so these third spaces are kind of fading away. And part of that is economics. Bowling alleys and things like that have gone out of fashion in some places. A lot of these clubs and places where people gather, even parks are kind of shrinking as these open public spaces kind of get bought up and turned into malls and other things that are privately owned. I mean, how many beaches do we have that, suddenly somebody slaps a fence on there and now it's only for the very rich? You could be like Mark Zuckerberg buying up all these beaches in Hawaii. And so these spaces are shrinking for us to be ourselves with one another. And I think this finding of what happens when we are lonely, so the study concluded that not only are we feeling more lonely, more isolated from one another, but also that there are some real effects of being lonely. Our anxiety is higher, our stress level is higher, people live shorter lives and are more prone to illnesses of different kinds when you're feeling isolated, lonely, all these things that come as a result of not having this sense of community. And so, what I talked about in my talk in Honolulu was that this really resonated with me because it sounded just like the story of our temple's founder, Shinran Shonin, there on the right-hand side. He's somebody who must have felt tremendously lonely growing up. He is the monk who, without really intending to, founded Jodo Shinshu. He's somebody who, from age 9, lived in the monastery, and so for decades he studied, he lived as a monk, chanting and learning all these different rituals, but at the end of his time there, I think he felt very lonely. In his writings he talks about, all the other monks, they're doing fortune telling, and they're getting involved with all these worldly pursuits, and he eventually leaves the monastery in search for this deeper connection to Buddhism. He feels like here in the monastery I'm learning so much, but it's just causing my ego to get larger. It's causing me to look down on other people the more time I spend learning. I need to find something that can, bring me down to earth. And so this is what he finds with his teacher, the person who will become his great teacher, Honen Shonin. And Honen, I think he must have been thought of at the time of kind of like what we think of as like a hippie commune or something like that. It was very different from the Buddhism of the time. For one thing, the emphasis was on Amida Buddha, and of saying and listening to what we call the Nembutsu, Namu Amida Butsu. It's this idea that you don't have to become a monk and study for years in order to study Buddhism. This is a time when Buddhism was not open to everybody. For women, or depending on your job or your background, you could be completely excluded from Buddhism. But in this community that Honen Shonin set up, people were welcomed in from rich and poor, highly educated and illiterate. People all gathered together to listen and study this teaching of the Pure Land. And so this is like the ultimate third space. There were people there who were, wanted criminals, murderers, sex workers, people from all different walks of life from Kyoto who had gathered there. And that the idea is that all you have to do is to put your hands together and say Namu Amida Butsu. You take refuge in this Amida Buddha and the Hongan, the original aspiration for birth in the Pure Land, basically the coming to awakening about who we are and the world we live in. And so this is kind of the birth of a very egalitarian form of Buddhism. This is a cure for loneliness of that time, and that Shinran's great joy in becoming part of that congregation, becoming part of that Sangha, being able to copy a portrait of his teacher to be able to, you know, be a functional member of this community, filled him with a sense of great purpose that I think was lacking from the rest of his life. And one of the things that they taught us in the seminary in Kyoto is that, you know, we're not just trying to learn exactly what Shinran and the different teachers in our tradition taught. We're trying to learn how to think like they do, learn how to find inspiration in the world around us. See that the wonderful thing that Shinran discovered, in addition to this community, was a total change of perspective. See, in the monastery, everything he saw as an obstacle. Oh, you know, this person's getting in my way. Oh, this person knows how the scriptures better than I do. You know, he's seeing all these obstacles. But as he comes in contact with this Hongan, with this Nembutsu teaching, it's all about changing your perspective. You know, it's kind of like you can think of the entire world as the Pure Land. And so what is a Pure Land? We're a Pure Land Buddhist temple. The Pure Land is a place where anyone, irregardless of their background, can become awakened. And that the idea is that it's almost as if when you have this turning of the mind, you have the light bulb come on in your life, you realize that everything in your life and everyone in your life is representing this wisdom of the Pure Land. The people who you get mad at work, or the guy who cuts you off on the freeway, that's a Buddha right there. That's a Bodhisattva right there. It may be kind of hard to see, especially when you're on the 5 or the 101 and it gets pretty bad, but those people are all trying to teach you something. One of my teachers explained it like, imagine that every single person in this world has already been awakened. All of them have become a Buddha. They become an awakened one. And so they are, without trying to tip you off, trying to guide you towards awakening, towards seeing the world past our own ego-centered self, to be able to see the world past our prejudices, to see the world past the divisions of me and you, to see the oneness of things. And, you know, it's a difficult lesson for us to learn, but it's one that we can practice every day. You know, it may be hard to believe, but I was somebody who was very lonely in my college years. I went to a commuter school, if you've heard of Cal Poly Pomona. Nobody lived on campus. We all drove there from other places. So there wasn't a huge sense of community on campus. And this is a time also when the Nisei, especially like my grandparents, were passing away, and so was losing connection to that second generation of people. But, you know, something brought me to this temple back in the early 2000s. You know, the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War was coming on, and I found this community that was very welcoming. You know, I found this third space that welcomed me in and put me to work cutting up chicken at the booth at the Bon Dance. But, you know, when I would talk to the people at the temple, I was seeing people who had marinated in the sauce of Buddhism for many years. And I could see that the way that they had of looking at the world, the way that they treated other people, was totally different from, you know, what I thought of, you know, how things would be. And that after many years of listening to the choir, of listening to Rinban Ito's talks, I started to get this sense of this third space beyond just the temple. There's this wonderful community that we're all tapped into the moment we walk in these doors. Not just to the people who are gathered here, but also to the previous generations. You know, each one of us carries with us the wisdom, the experiences of all of our ancestors that we absorb without our knowledge, without being aware of it. The way that our grandparents and their grandparents lived and treated other people, looked at the world, they pass it down to the generation after them. And so we're carrying this wonderful legacy. And when we come in contact with Buddhism, it's like natural light hitting a prism. It splits it into a rainbow of colors. The wisdom of the world filtered through our experience, helps to teach other people. Like I said, everybody around us is this Buddha. It's because we cannot help but to be struck by the light of the Buddhist wisdom and reflect it to the people around us. And that as we continue to listen to the stories, to talk to other people, to hear their experiences as filtered through Buddhism, we learn more and more and more that we could never learn in just a textbook, that we could never learn just in a lecture. In Hawaii, they call that talk story, learning about other people and getting in touch and keeping these stories alive between these generations. But here in Los Angeles, I can see that it's not just us sitting here in the room, it's the Nisei, the Issei, it's people from all different backgrounds who have come here to this temple, who have worked hard to keep the building standing, who have contributed to our Obon festival, to all of our events here. It's to our neighbors, it's to the restaurants and shops in this area who have kept Little Tokyo alive, that these people are all Buddhas in our lives. And that, it's hard to remember this stuff. When we leave the temple, when we leave the Hondo after a Sunday service, it's easy for the stuff from the Dharma talk to kind of fall out of our mind. I know it is for me, definitely when I was a member and even as a minister. But, if you folks keep one thing from today, I think it's to remember that, there are Buddhas all around us. There are people who are trying to bring us to enlightenment, whether they realize it or not. We have so much of a legacy here at this temple, and I'm very proud to be even just a tiny part of it. And that, I hope that you folks all have a wonderful afternoon. I hope that, any folks affected by the fires here in Los Angeles are okay. Please, reach out if you folks need any help. But, this is a world that we're able to build day by day with our actions, with our thoughts, with the way that we interact and support other people. So, it may seem like in this confused and often frightening world that we live in, that the Pure Land is far away, but we're living in it right now, and that we make it into the Pure Land every day with how we treat others. So I'd like to thank you folks so much for listening to my rambling today, and thank you all for coming.